She walked 3 blocks. 3 blocks. A route she had walked 100 times before. 1 minute she was laughing with friends inside a packed Seattle bar. The next minute, she was gone. And the man who took her life, he went home, made coffee, watched the morning news, and lived freely for 9 years, while her family buried an empty future. This is the story of Mia Zapata. And if what happened to her doesn't keep you up tonight, the ending will. Picture Seattle in the early 1990s. Rain-soaked streets, neon lights bleeding through the mist. And everywhere you looked, music. This wasn't just a city going through a moment. This was the center of a cultural explosion. Grunge was being born on these sidewalks, in these clubs, in these rehearsal rooms that smelled like cigarettes and ambition. New bands appeared every single week. Small clubs were packed wall to wall. Record labels sent scouts from across the country. If you had talent, if you had something real, Seattle in 1993 was the place to be. And Mia Zapata? She belonged there completely. As the lead vocalist of the Gits, Mia wasn't famous yet in the way that fills stadiums, but she had something rarer than fame. She had presence, the kind that makes a room go quiet the moment you open your mouth. People who saw her perform even once never forgot her. She wasn't imitating the sounds around her. She wasn't riding the coattails of anyone else. Her voice was raw, honest, powerful in a way that hit you somewhere deep. Friends who knew her described someone who seemed genuinely destined for something extraordinary. Not because she chased attention, but because attention found her anyway. More shows, more recognition, more momentum building every single month. The future looked limitless. Then came the night of July 7th, 1993. It was a normal summer evening. Mia spent it doing what she loved, being around music, being around friends, laughing, living. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, nothing that suggested this would be the last time the people around her would ever see her alive. At some point in the night, she left, alone. A short walk, just 3 blocks through the Capitol Hill neighborhood she knew well. It was a walk she had made before, a walk most people make without thinking twice, a walk that should have ended with a door closing behind her, keys dropped on a table, shoes kicked off, and sleep. Mia never made it home. The following morning, her body was found on South Henderson Street. She was 27 years old. Here's what I want you to think about right now. A killer just committed a violent crime in the middle of a city. People were nearby. It was summer. People were outside. And yet, nobody saw anything useful. Or if they did, they didn't know what they had seen. Drop your theory in the comments right now. How does someone do this in the middle of a city and just disappear? I'll be reading every single one. The Seattle music community was devastated. Vigils were held. Tributes poured in from bands across the country. Fellow musicians started a self-defense program called Home Alive, teaching women to protect themselves directly because of what happened to Mia. Her death changed things. But for detectives, the clock was already running. Witnesses were interviewed. Suspects were identified and cleared. Evidence was collected from the scene. Tips came in from across the city. In the early days, investigators genuinely believed this would be solved fast. A crime this visible? In a community this tight-knit? Surely someone had seen something. But the weeks passed, then months, then years. Every detective has a case that haunts them, a file they open late at night when they can't sleep, a name they never stop thinking about, a family they made a silent promise to. For the detectives working the Mia Zapata case, this was that file. Evidence existed, but not enough. Witnesses remembered fragments, but nothing solid. Tips arrived regularly, but every lead collapsed. The killer had vanished into ordinary life. Maybe he was living nearby. Maybe he passed people who knew Mia on the street. Maybe he watched the news coverage of her death and felt nothing. For Mia's family, each year without answers was its own kind of wound. Every birthday, every anniversary of her death, every Christmas. The question never changed. Who did this? 9 years go by. The technology barely exists yet. The leads have gone cold. Most investigators would quietly move on. But here's what I want to know. Do you think cold cases should have a time limit? Or does justice have no expiration date? Comment below, because this one actually gets debated. Here's where the story changes. Because while the years passed, something else was changing too. Science. Forensic technology that didn't exist in 1993 was quietly being developed. DNA analysis techniques were advancing faster than anyone predicted. Samples once considered too degraded, too small, too old, were suddenly readable. Investigators never stopped believing the evidence they had collected could eventually speak. And in 2003, 10 years after Mia's murder, it finally did. DNA recovered from the original crime scene was run through a database. It matched. Not a suspect already on their radar, not someone connected to the Seattle music scene, not someone anyone would have predicted. A man named Jesus Mezquia, a fisherman from Florida, someone who had no obvious connection to Mia's world whatsoever. He had been living freely for 9 years. 9 years of ordinary mornings. 9 years while a family waited. In 2004, Jesus Mezquia was convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to life in prison. Here's something prosecutors and detectives will tell you privately. A conviction doesn't end the story. Not for the people left behind. Justice identifies who is responsible. But closure is something different. Something heavier. Something that doesn't arrive with a verdict. Mia's friends still carry the weight of that summer night. Still wonder what she would have created, what her voice would have become, where the music would have taken her. Those questions don't disappear when a judge reads a sentence. But here is what the case gave the world, beyond the verdict. Proof that time doesn't automatically defeat justice. Proof that forensic science can rewrite cold cases. Proof that investigators who refuse to quit sometimes get to make a phone call to a family that changes everything. Here's the question that genuinely keeps me up. DNA technology in 1993 couldn't solve this, but DNA technology in 2003 could. How many other killers right now are living freely only because the technology to catch them hasn't been invented yet? Think about that. Then drop your answer below, because I think it's a bigger number than any of us want to admit. Mia Zapata was 27 years old. She never got to record the albums people believed she had inside her. She never got to fill the larger stages that were waiting. She never got to hear how many lives her music would eventually touch. But her story did something she couldn't have planned. It built a community.
The Home Alive self-defense program she inspired has taught thousands of women to protect themselves. Her band's music continued to reach new listeners long after her death, and her case became a landmark example in forensic science. Proof of what cold case DNA investigation can accomplish. A killer thought 9 years was enough to be safe. He was wrong. Mia's killer was found because technology caught up with him. But our next story, the technology exists. The investigators searched. The case is decades old, and it is still unsolved. A girl disappears, not on a hiking trail, not while traveling alone, not in a dangerous part of town. She disappears from her own neighborhood, 3 houses from her front door, in broad daylight. And to this day, nobody knows what happened. Subscribe, because that story drops next, and you're going to want to see where it leads.